More than 1,000 police and security guards have started moving in to evict 300 people, occupying houses along the route of the planned M11 Link Road in East London. Protesters are resisting the bailiffs.
At dawn this morning, a wide area around the 6 homes that have been occupied by protesters was cordoned off by police. The squatters have spent the last few days building barricades and digging trenches to hamper the bailiffs' attempts to evict them. Some demonstrators were planning to chain themselves to parts of the buildings to stop attempts to drag them away. Police estimate that there could be as many as 300 people resisting the eviction, their numbers swelled by anti-roads groups from across the country. The police are clearly ready for any trouble. 700 officers are on standby. Police and bailiffs are expecting it to be a long day. The bailiffs moved in just before 8 and the first protesters were dragged away shortly after. Several hundred demonstrators have barricaded themselves into 6 homes in Cambridge Park, which are blocking the M11 Link Road. Some have set their hands in concrete to frustrate the work of the bailiffs. Scores of police have sealed off the area. 700 officers are on standby in case of trouble. Police are hoping to avoid the scenes of violence that erupted when they tried to dislodge protesters from a nearby chestnut tree back in December. So far, the operation has passed off peacefully, but police and bailiffs expect it to last most of the day.
They're on the path of the controversial M11 Link Road. Christopher Peacock is in Wanstead now. Chris, is the operation going according to plan?
Paul, we understand about 100 protesters have now been evicted from the homes. That leaves 200 on the rooftops and in the trees. How to get them down is giving the police some cause for concern. There's no element of surprise. The police come in force, 700 of them. The battle line is drawn as 400 M11 protesters barricade themselves inside 7 homes. Homes which stand in the path of the M11 Link Road. Homes the protesters say they will defend to the end. The offensive is on as police are there to assist bailiffs and deputy sheriffs to repossess the homes. Doors are smashed in and protesters are dragged away. Police are concerned about trouble from left-wing activists infiltrating the protest.
But clearly on previous events that we've had, they have hijacked their meetings, caused considerable amounts of damage and people have been arrested.
Today is a crucial day in the fight over the M11 Link Road. These homes are all that stand in the way of the road being built. The protesters say they will fight for every last roof tile to stop them from being demolished. This is an expensive and huge police operation here. 700 officers, it's costing £15,000 an hour. It looks like being a long and expensive day.
County court bailiffs and sheriffs were backed up by more than 700 police and 200 security men for today's operation. Protesters are fighting to save 5 Edwardian houses standing in the path of the planned M11 extension.
The battle line is drawn as 400 M11 protesters barricade themselves inside 7 homes. Homes which stand in the path of the M11 Link Road. Homes the protesters say they will defend to the end. The offensive is on as police are there to assist bailiffs and deputy sheriffs to repossess the homes. Doors are smashed in and protesters are dragged away. Police are concerned about trouble from left-wing activists infiltrating the protest.
But clearly on previous events that we've had, they have hijacked their meetings, caused considerable amounts of damage and people have been arrested.
Today is a crucial day in the fight over the M11 Link Road. These homes are all that stand in the way of the road being built. The protesters say they will fight for every last roof tile to stop them from being demolished.
Christopher Peacock reporting, and we'll have a live update on that story for you at 12:20.
Bailiffs backed by more than 700 police and 200 security guards began evicting demonstrators from 5 Edwardian houses which stand in the way of the M11 extension in Wanstead.
1,000 police, bailiffs and security men are taking part, twice the number that cleared demonstrators from a tree on Wanstead Green 2 months ago. Christopher Peacock is in Wanstead now. Chris, how is this mass eviction going?
Paul, I think eviction is the wrong word. It's now become a siege. We're 5 hours into it. So far, 100 protesters have been removed from the homes, but 200 have fled to the rooftops. This, they say, is their last refuge.
Many of the protesters have made large concrete drums with metal barriers going through them, and they've then handcuffed and chained themselves to these large drums.
Parishioners of Wanstead emerged from church on the opposite side of the road, dumbfounded at what they see. These houses are all that stand in the way of the M11 Link Road. The protesters say they will fight to the last roof tile to stop them from being demolished. But as the day wears on, tempers are being lost as the bailiffs move in closer. Well, as you can see from those latest pictures we've just filed, tempers really are boiling over now. The police are pledged to a peaceful day here, but as the day wears on, as we get into the afternoon, I think things could get very difficult indeed. It's perhaps worth making the point that there are 700 police on the ground here. It's costing £15,000 an hour to keep this operation going. It's going to be a very long and expensive day.
The bailiffs moved in at 8 this morning and the first protesters were dragged out minutes later. Several scuffles broke out as dozens of demonstrators tried to break through the huge police cordon that has been thrown up around the 6 homes that are blocking the route of the M11 Link Road. Around 300 squatters have barricaded themselves inside. A number of them have set their hands in concrete drums to frustrate the work of the bailiffs.
The majority of the protesters have insisted from the start that they will be peaceful. They have been peaceful, and I'd like to compliment them on that. Having said that, their tactic from the start has been to slow the process down.
My clients actually lived in these houses. They're defending their home, just as you would and I would. They may do it in an unusual manner, and that's what they're doing.
700 police are on standby, along with 200 security guards who are ready to move in when the last of the protesters have been removed. Police say they're adopting a softly approach to today's mass eviction. Officers are keen to avoid the violence that erupted when they removed demonstrators from a nearby chestnut tree back in December.
And James Cameron is in Wanstead now. James, the operation appears to be going as the police planned.
That's right. Despite the large numbers of people involved, both protesters and police, only 3 people have been arrested at the moment. I think the police will be well pleased with the operation. Tempers have become a little frayed on both sides, as you can imagine. But then, of course, this is a fairly dangerous thing that they're doing here, taking these demonstrators out of these homes. But no serious trouble at the moment.
Bailiffs and officials wielding sledgehammers and crowbars moved in to evict protesters from 5 Edwardian houses in the path of the extension. From the roofs, the protesters responded with a hail of eggs.
A battle of wits played out on the rooftops. For 300 anti-motorway protesters, a defiant last stand before the bulldozers move in. Some on the tiles, some perched in the trees, others barricaded and chained together inside.
Most of them have said from the start, the demonstrators, that their intention is to be passive, but to block people from taking them away.
The 6 condemned houses stand in the path of the M11 Link Road. Court officers and bailiffs broke their way in today, backed up by 700 police. Those inside were led or carried or dragged away one by one. Those on top could only be reached by hydraulic platform. They proved the most reluctant to move. At this point, scuffles broke out on the ground as demonstrators ran towards a police line. Some simply ignored the obvious hazards.
You are in danger of injuring yourself in that position.
But late this afternoon, the last few rooftop squatters were finally evicted. And this evening, 8 hours after the operation began, the houses have been demolished. Only the tree dwellers remain to be dealt with. Simon Harris, ITN, Wanstead in East London.
And we'll have 2 reports coming up later in tonight's programme, including exclusive pictures from behind the barricades. Our cameras were inside with the protesters throughout the night and this morning as police and bailiffs moved in. That's all coming up at 6:30.
The police in East London have run into the organised resistance of the M11 protesters before, and 700 of them were on duty to support bailiffs and sheriff's officers. Their task was to gain possession of 6 Edwardian houses in the path of the road, where demonstrators have made their last stand. They refused to hand over the houses, so the bailiffs had to climb in and take them. Looking rather sheepish about the whole thing, there were more surprises to come, as they had to pick their way through the 300 protesters inside the buildings. There were some lively encounters, but the protest was mainly peaceful, and one by one the demonstrators were taken out of the houses and away from the area. With the demolition going on around them, those most determined not to leave took to the roofs. bolt cutters were needed to free one man who'd chained himself to a weather vane. He was eventually lifted clear, no match in the end for the combination of men and equipment brought in to allow the road building to continue.
I think it's gone very successfully. It's been taken very, very slowly and gently, insofar as my officers were able to do so. There has been some resistance from the occupiers and the protesters to make their point.
They said they'd continue to harry the M11 road project. Honour seemed to be satisfied on both sides today. The houses have already been demolished. The only protesters left are huddled together in a tree, with the sheriff's men still soaring through the branches to get to them. Neil Bennett, BBC News, East London.
Surrendering to the bailiffs, there's no hiding place as the door is beaten down. The so-called state of Wanstonia is dying, crumbling away under bailiffs' hammers. And all the time, the M11 protesters know the odds of surviving this siege are against them. But hands chained to masonry, they remain defiant to the last. There was no element of surprise when the police arrived. They came in force, 700 of them. The battle line drawn as 300 protesters barricaded themselves around numbers 8 and 10 Cambridge Park. Homes the protesters say they will defend to the end.
They're not going to give up unless they're really forced to.
This is just the beginning. I mean, we're going to fight this every single inch, every single millimetre.
There are still a lot more houses and we'll still keep protesting.
The police are here to help the bailiffs repossess the homes. As word gets round they're going in, tempers flare outside.
Think about what you're doing to the planet! Watch it! Think about it! Think about it!
Arrests are small, but many protesters are dragged away amid claims that the houses are booby-trapped, an added danger for police and bailiffs.
This is the face of British democracy!
The danger for the police officers, but more importantly the bailiffs and the under-sheriff, is that many of the floorboards on the premises over here, on the first floor, have been taken out, and so have the staircases. Many of the protesters have made large concrete drums with metal barriers going through them, and they've then handcuffed and chained themselves to these large drums.
Across the road, parishioners of Wanstead emerge from church, amazed at what they're seeing, but sympathetic to the protesters' cause.
I think that on the whole, these people are very well-meaning people, and I think it's a shame that perhaps they don't get a little bit more support.
As the houses are cleared, the protesters take to the rooftops, a last desperate stand, and there are some anxious moments as bailiffs in a cherry picker attempt to pick them off. It's been a crucial day in the long-running story of the M11 Link Road. A day for putting anti-road campaigners into the national spotlight. These houses are among the last standing in the path of the new motorway link. The protesters said they would fight for every last tile, but in the end the bailiffs were bound to win. What's left is a pile of rubble and a heap of broken dreams. Well, the protesters began digging in at these homes some weeks ago, knowing full well that one day, someday, they'd have to face the bailiffs. Our reporter Paul Wandler spent the night at number 2 Cambridge Park with some of the protesters.
Midnight last night, and campaigners gather round the fire to sing songs. Inside, preparation for confrontation with the forces of law and order. Attracting most attention in house number 2 is this bunker, a small room surrounded by a mixture of reinforced concrete and steel.
If they do manage to get in, then Patsy and I shall be locking onto this washing machine that's being filled with concrete, and there's steel tubes put inside with hooks inside, and we'll be attaching ourselves with handcuffs onto it.
If there's fear at what may happen in the morning, many aren't showing it.
Maybe the last bath anybody will have there. It's disgraceful. But I might have another one before they come in.
Some, though, have previous run-ins with the bailiffs and police in mind.
The last time there was a big scene here was the chestnut tree, and although I wasn't there, I've heard any number of stories and seen the bruises on people afterwards. And yes, I'm very, very nervous. I'm terrified, in fact.
1:15 a.m. and inside campaign headquarters next door, floorboards have been stripped to cover windows. On to house number 10. For some protesters, it's all too much. Others plan on seeing the night through. Outside in the tree house, a watchful eye is kept on the road. 4 a.m. and it's back to house number 2. Rebecca gives a legal briefing to advise campaigners what to do if arrested. Then it's into her reinforced bunker with supplies enough for 5 days. Daylight breaks and outside the police and bailiffs arrive en masse. But there's determination to see this through to the bitter end.
I've lived here for 20 years and I think that people should protect their land, protect what is theirs by rights. Just because they've got a piece of paper for that land doesn't mean to say it's theirs.
It's now 8 a.m. in number 2 Cambridge Park. Downstairs we can hear the sound of sledgehammers. Upstairs we're completely sealed off. But it was only a matter of time before the bailiffs broke through. And from then on, the protesters had nowhere to run. In Wanstead, this is Paul Wandless for London Tonight.
Chris, you and Paul have spent a good deal of time down there observing as reporters. What's your estimation of how the police and the protesters have behaved?
Alistair, that's always a difficult line to draw on occasions such as this. I suspect the police have probably learned some lessons since the infamous Battle of the Chestnut Tree that took place at Wanstead just before Christmas. On that occasion, there were some ugly scenes. There haven't been those sort of confrontations today. I think the police have tried to understand and sympathise with the cause of the protesters, but also making sure that the bailiffs were able to carry out their job. Only 6 arrests at the end of this very long day, which probably tells you something.
Chris, and finally, remind me, how much did this operation cost?
There will be questions about that, Alistair. It's reckoned that by the end of the day, something like £200,000. And the protesters say this offensive isn't over yet. The homes may be bulldozed, but the fight will go on.
Christopher, thank you very much indeed. The Battle of Wanstead. Passion, anger and defiance, but as Chris said, with the houses now in rubble. And in case you've forgotten, at the centre of it all is a new road. It's a £200 million highway linking the M11 at Redbridge with Hackney. And it's here that contractors have met fierce resistance, on the green at Wanstead, where the ancient chestnut tree came down, and in nearby houses along Cambridge Park Road. And that's a story we'll be following in our late bulletin, and no doubt for some time to come.
The police in East London have run into the organised resistance of the M11 protesters before, and 700 of them were on duty to support bailiffs and sheriff's officers. Their task was to gain possession of 6 Edwardian houses in the path of the road where demonstrators have made their last stand. They refused to hand over the houses, so the bailiffs had to climb in and take them. Looking rather sheepish about the whole thing, there were more surprises to come, as they had to pick their way through the 300 protesters inside the buildings. There were some lively encounters, but the protest was mainly peaceful, and one by one the demonstrators were taken out of the houses and away from the area. With the demolition going on around them, those most determined not to leave took to the roofs. Bolt cutters were needed to free one man who'd chained himself to a weather vane. He was eventually lifted clear, no match in the end for the combination of men and equipment brought in to allow the road building to continue. It took 11 hours before the last of the demonstrators were plucked out of a tree, vowing to harry the M11 project all the way. But on this site, there was nothing left to protest about. Neil Bennett, BBC News, East London.
The protesters lost, but already they're establishing a new fortified camp for the next battle, and that battle could be even more intense as the campaigners gather supporters right across the community. But London's Transport Minister Steve Norris says the protests are futile, so we took a direct appeal from him to the Wanstead protesters. Phil Bales reports.
Just who are the protesters Stephen Norris is appealing to for restraint? The members of the Donga and Flowerpot tribes camped out in their benders by the side of the M11 route? Or the residents of Wanstead suburbia, comfortable in detached homes until the peace was shattered by the pitched battles on their doorsteps? The tribesmen, having declared the area a republic, are digging in for a long confrontation. The bona fide residents of Wanstonia have watched the number of squatters grow. They listened to the minister's appeal for an end to resistance.
You've made your point.
Now let's get on and build this road and give people the environment they deserve.
I'm worried about the children. I mean, I'm the lollipop lady.
The children are saying no to this
the
road.
Children have got
the old
more
people
sense.
are saying no. All the local people are saying no. Environmentalists are saying no.
But it's the children.
Everybody
It's
is saying no.
important.
But our MPs are just not listening to us.
They're not listening. They don't want to know.
We've actually heard the local people and what we've got to say.
As soon as the scheme is built, people will see traffic in the area reduced by 75%. They'll see fewer deaths, fewer serious injuries, and better environment for all of the people who live there. That's what they deserve.
I mean, the levels of carbon dioxide, the levels of sort of pollution along the road here at the moment are 3 times larger than Oxford Street, and their argument is that it's going to reduce because the traffic's going to go faster. But we all know that in a couple of years' time it's going to clog up just as badly, and so the pollution level is going to be ridiculously high, well above World Health Organisation limits.
It brings all this extra traffic into the heart of London. It's almost like a poison dart aimed at the heart of London.
If he's to win support for the road, Mr Norris must convince several groups resisting it from widely differing backgrounds. Apart from the fears they express for the environment, some residents feel it's the road that has imposed a republic on them, where security guards patrol the streets as if they're expecting imminent invasion.
They're just taking over and commandeering Wanstead. We feel like the aliens here now.
I walked down the road yesterday. There were 18 guards on the green. There were 8 up the high street. They're everywhere. You cross the road, they're coming at you.
More squatters are arriving and professional protest groups are active in the community. But there's genuine opposition from local people, like this from a family which has been in Wanstead for 3 generations.
It doesn't matter whether you're a new age traveller, a hippie, a local resident. I don't care if they come from Timbuktu.
I don't care if they
We're
come
all
from
trying
Mars.
to stop this stupid road.
The tents are detached, and that's all the squatters had in common with the residents of St Mary's Avenue. Until the road came. This is Phil Bales for Crosstalk.
And of course that's a story we'll be following closely, both on Crosstalk and on London Tonight, in the coming weeks. I'm joined now in the studio by Crosstalk regular David Mellor, MP for Putney, and by a newcomer to Crosstalk, Diane Abbott, Labour MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington. Before we turn to other matters, I'd like Diane Abbott, really, since you're on the patch, do you support those protesters or not?
Of course I do.
You do?
Yes. The problem with this government is they've pulled hundreds of £millions into roads and neglecting public transport. That road is going to cost tens of millions of pounds to build 4 miles of road. If that money was put into public transport, that would do a great deal to help traffic congestion.
We've had, I think, 3 public inquiries, though, haven't we, into this particular
Well,
spot?
it's quite clear that the people that live around there are against this road, and how can you justify all that money for 4 miles of road when anybody that travels on public transport knows it's crumbling before our eyes?
Right, David Mellor, rather than the specific, and it's not really your patch, the general point, I think, here is that we become a great nation of great protesters, haven't we? Very difficult to see anything that's going to be built the way we're going.
Well, that's exactly the problem. Are we going to be a modern society or are we not? Are we going to be a society that's trying to compete with the world's best in the 21st century on the transport infrastructure of the 19th century? I mean, I don't have
an underground that dates to the 19th century.
Shall I just shut up and let you just interview her?
That doesn't sound bad to me, David.
I think you're just, you know, when you're on this programme, we have a little bit of give and take. It's the way the programme works.
Anyway, we're giving you, David.
Shall I carry on?
You finish off.
I was simply... No, it's not a question of getting cross. It's just a question
of getting rather
viewers at home.
Pompous.
Let's waste any more time.
The viewers at home don't like a lot of this sort of nonsense. And
the viewers can decide for themselves, David.
We actually don't do it. Point of the matter is that so far as public transport is concerned, it's not really a choice between public transport and roads. Society doesn't, the government doesn't force people to go into their cars. People want to use cars. There's certain forms of goods and services that can only be delivered by road, and so you have to make a difficult judgment. Now, I think it's a very difficult judgment for the government to make. I mean, for instance, in my constituency, we don't want new roads, and I can well understand there are people in Wanstead who don't. But if there have been this number of public inquiries, and, you know, the proper democratic process has been gone through, then surely at some point you have to say enough is enough and have some progress. Otherwise, we're going to find London getting increasingly dirty with lots of nasty, heavy vehicles rolling round on roads that weren't built for them. And people say, well, why not get rid of the heavy vehicles? How are we going to stock up the supermarkets and all the businesses that we want in London? It's not possible.
Well, just quickly on that one, Diana. It's not simple, is it? Simply to say, simply stop roads and everything will be all right. I mean, the fact is, people want roads, people want cars, and they want to drive into London.
A lot of people in London resort to driving because of the problems with public transport. I tell you, the people who are keenest on spending money on public transport in London, cab drivers, because they know that if you put money into public transport and sort it out,
you'd only have cab drivers on the road, and then they'd all make lots of money.
No, it's a serious argument. People that use the roads in London know that one of the reasons there's so much congestion is because of the problems with public transport. People are forced, contrary to what David was saying, people are forced to use cars in London because of the state of public transport. And I don't... David said, well, you know, are we going to become a nation of protesters? The question is, are we going to become a democratic nation? Well, if all those people are against that road, I think it needs to be looked at again.
These people are not interested in democracy. They're interested... They've gone through the democratic process, and there have been public inquiries. The problem for our society is whether we actually intend to be a modern society that's capable of getting things done, or whether any minority can actually prevent. A lot of the people that have come to protest here are just people that come from all over the country. They live a life of permanent protest, but they're not the people who are going to feed and clothe and house us all. People who are going to feed and clothe and house us all are people who are running a modern, industrialised and commercial society, and you have to be able to move goods and services around. It's as simple as that.
Right, let's turn to another issue.